and welcome to the College Football Bros. I'm Ryan Newman. Well, the big news in the college football world the past few days has been about the comments from Florida State Athletic Director Michael Alford. He made some pretty straightforward, clear comments at their Board of Trustees meeting, and we kind of know exactly what Florida State's thinking right now. So let's kind of dive into it here. And I guess before we talk about the hypotheticals and why or how Florida State might leave the ACC, let's take a look at the numbers. All right. More importantly, the money. So taking a look here, conference revenue, that is the driving factor of all of this, right? So here's the important numbers. Big Ten teams, $80 million per year is what they're going to get starting this year. All right. So those Big Ten teams are getting a ton of money. If you look at the SEC, they're at about $70 million. That deal will actually start in 2024. So they got another year for them until they get to that. But still, a lot of SEC coming for the SEC as well. Now, I put FSU there, but that's just ACC as well. They're looking at about just over $40 million. So, and keep in mind that contract actually runs until the year 2036. So that's a significant difference from the top two conferences there. I mean, 30 plus million. That's hard to make up as far as, other sources of income, then just keep competing on the field and competing in facilities and resources and coaching salaries, all that. How are you going to compete when you keep losing 30 million every year? I mean, if you're talking for the next decade plus, you're approaching almost $500 million, right? So that's just not going to be reasonable. And it's not going to be, Florida State's just not going to let that happen for that long, right? There's just no way that they can do that. They're too good, too big of a brand to be able to allow that. So moving on here in the next slide, talking about viewership of the ACC, FSU currently represents about, they currently get, I should say, about 70% more viewers than the ACC average team. So they're getting eyeballs a lot more than your average ACC squad. And then Clemson's actually kind of right there neck and neck with the Seminoles. So if you look at this particular pie chart here, FSU and Clemson represent 51% of all viewership of ACC games in the last 8 years. So, I know a lot of folks will make the argument, yeah, they get the best time slots and they're kind of get the best matchups, but I mean, there's a reason that they're put those times. It's what draws the most attention. They have the most value, that people care about them more than the other ACC schools in general. So, that's such a huge dominant factor of this that FSU and Clemson have. But even though they have such dominance in that area, they're not getting their fair share of the value coming back to them. So the revenue distribution from the ACC, it's equal. So they only get about 7%, whereas they're contributing a lot more than that. So the other schools are getting a heck of a lot more value by having those two schools than the flip side, right? So it's a little, FSU Clemson's thinking it's a little unfair to them in that way. And I don't blame them. I kind of understand where they're coming from. Now, if you take away the conference TV deals, FSU's athletic department, their revenue would rank third in the Big Ten and the ACC. So they actually do a really good job of bringing in the money. Unfortunately for them, they're just in a conference that has a lousy media deal. And to make matters worse, I kind of already mentioned it here, but the ACC's contract runs for another like 13 more years. And that's longer than any other conference's deal. So all the other conferences, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, their deals will end sooner, and they'll be able to renegotiate for even better media rights deals. So that 30 to 40 million gap between those top conferences that I was saying, that's probably going to be higher when those other deals are renegotiated. So it could turn into like 50 million. So as you can see, it is clearly, in Florida State's best interest to put pressure on the ACC to give them a better deal, or they're just going to find a way to leave, sooner rather than later. Their athletic director said, they're trying to work with the ACC and change kind of the distribution model, because in his words, the current setup it's just not going to work for them in the long haul. So kind of speaking of leaving early, this is what is kind of the hold up to all of this and why Florida State probably hasn't left already. What's it going to take for them to get out of there get out of the ACC? The easy answer is, according to the bylaws, is 3 times of the annual operating budget of the ACC, which this past year is about 40 million. So times that by 3, 120 million. That would be, they could get out tomorrow with 120 million to pay. However, that's just them leaving the conference. Their grant of rights would still be owned by the ACC. So in order to get out of the grant of rights part of the deal, I mean, now you're talking hundreds of millions. Like that, the 120 million is the small one, not as big of a deal. If it was only that, Florida State would probably already be gone by now. But the grant of rights is the big holdup, and that one, nobody knows the exact amount. I'm sure they would, if FSU does decide to leave, they'll go to court and have a big legal battle over how much money that they do actually have to pay. That's kind of the main thing. That's why it's being held up here. Now, to me, if I'm FSU, I think I kind of have a simple view of it, though. If the other ACC schools don't give me a larger pie of the revenue sharing, then I'm just going to try to leave. Okay. Because let's say even the grant of rights, between the grant of rights and the 120 million, let's say it's like $300 million that they'd have to pay. Well, if you're going to get 30 plus more million per year by being in those other conferences, maybe in about a decade, maybe a little less, considering I'd probably make more than 30 million after those other contracts are renegotiated. So probably less than a decade, you're going to be, breaking even. And then from that point on, you're going to be making money. Now, that's a lot of money to put up, but it does make sense. Now, where the tricky part is if the ACC says, okay, sure, we will give you a little bit bigger share because, you have the more value, and heck, we don't want you to leave. Like, it's huge for our brands that you stay. So that could kind of get in the tricky spot. And that's what I would do if I was those other schools. Please, I'd say, hey, I'll give you 5 more million each team. Let's say each team gives up 5 million a year. Total, that's about 50, 60 million that could go to the top schools, maybe like Clemson and Florida State. Say, hey, stick with us. Maybe that's enough to convince them to come back and stay with the ACC. Now, ultimately, nobody really knows for sure what's going to happen. Still a lot of unknowns. But my guess is the ACC schools, not named Clemson, Florida State, they will budge on the revenue sharing. So those, Clemson, Florida State will get a bigger slice of the pie. But I don't think that's going to satisfy those schools in the long, long run. I do think that, by the time the ACC TV deal ends in 2036, I think those, like Florida State for sure, will be gone by then. I'd be shocked if they're still in the conference. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of money involved, a lot of power brokers being at play here, but that's just kind of my take on it. So let me know what you guys think. And that'll be it for this episode of the College Football Bros. Please leave us a comment. Love to hear your guys' opinions, especially on these kind of ACC rumors here. What's Florida State going to do? What's Clemson going to do? Love to hear from you fans in particular. But that'll be it. And I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.